Thank you for joining us here with a live stream. We're in my home today. We've got a bit of a rainy day out there. At least we did have this morning with a lot of rain in the apiary. So we're just going to answer Q&A here. And if you've got questions, put it in the comments below and we'll get to answering those. So Trace has phoned in. Can we hear you, Trace?
Hey, can you hear me, Cedar?
Okay, yeah, we've got you loud and clear. So she'll be reading out your questions. So as you think of them, put them in the comments below, and away we'll go. It's been a beautiful time here with the rain setting off the paperbark, and the smell is just amazing of that paperbark honey. It's really, really, I don't know, it's funny, like all honey is sweet, right? But the paperbark is particularly sweet. It's almost overpowering when you get a lot of it coming in at once. And that smell is drifting through my house at home because we've got lots of beehives around here, but also at the office as well. So it's great because we had a bit of a funny springtime here with the main species ironbark around my place didn't actually flower. So the bees have all been a little bit hungry, and it's great to see something flowering and the honey coming in again. So any questions coming in, Trace?
Yeah, Cedar, obviously up around area and lots of the east coast of Australia, there's been flooding. And a few people have been asking, and also on the phones actually this week, about what should they do to inspect their hives if the water looks like it's actually gone in their hives, but there's still bees all buzzing around everywhere.
Okay, so if you've actually had flood that's come up past the bottom of the hive, then you need to really get in there and do an inspection and have a look straight away. The reason being is, the bees can be look like they're active at the front, but they're trying to deal with a mess on the inside. So I was helping a beekeeper out recently whose hives got flooded all the way up to the excluder. And what that meant is a whole lot of the frames got sort of sodden with water, and the hives that were really busy could deal with it. They could clean all of that water out before it went kind of fermented and all sorts of things. And also they had a lot of capped brood in there, and that meant that the water wasn't actually going down in the cells. The hives that weren't as busy and had a lot of open cells, they filled up with water and the bees couldn't deal with it. Then the hive beetles latched onto that opportunistic moment there and created a hive beetle nest instead of a beehive, which is horrible to clean up. Turns into a big slimy mess. So you want to get in there and check if you've got hive beetles a lot in your area. You want to make sure they're kept at bay. If you've got any comb that's sort of gone mouldy and rotten from the floodwater being in it, then just chop that out. If you're using naturally drawn comb, you can just get a knife and chop those pieces out and let them draw again. And the idea is also if to reduce the size of your hive. So if your colony is having trouble and did get flooded, then you cut out all the rotten comb and even reduce the size and the numbers of frames in your brood box down to just like a nucleus where you've got four or so frames in the center, and either empty frames on the outside or even blank if you don't have time to get empties in there if you're using foundation. So you've got a lot less for the bees to manage and get back on their feet, and the queen to lay and so on. And you can take the super off as well. And that's how you can save a colony that's been flooded. So it's a bit unfortunate. We've had 2 floods here recently, and we do have a lot of beekeepers with flooded hives. One beekeeper I know had 50 hives and they just floated away in the flood, so it's very sad. He managed to save a few colonies from boxes that were found like a mile down the road, which was incredible. That bees can be that resilient, but generally he lost all of those. So yeah, good to keep the hives up out of flood zone if you can.
Oh, thanks, Cedar. Yeah, I know there's a lot of people really doing it tough out there. So, And the other question, Cedar, is when you were talking about the brood frames, is it all right to leave the brood frames that are in there if they've got a bit of mould on them? Is that a problem?
If they've been flooded, I would just chop out those mouldier sections of it and let them draw it again. So with naturally drawn comb, you can do that. You just get your knife and chop it out. If you've got plastic foundation, you obviously can't, but you could scrape it back to the plastic foundation. If you're using wax and wire, you can still chop it out. You've just got to be more careful that you don't chop those wires. So you could simply chop out the manky mouldy bits of frame and let them draw it again with some fresh new wax as they get back on their feet. Okay, we're getting a lot of clatter noise from you, Trace, there.
Oh, sorry, you got me there.
We've got you.
Yeah. Okay, great. Susie's asking, Cedar, when should I remove the queen excluder? Before any frost or when the overnight temperatures drop to a certain level?
Okay, good question. So there's no harm in doing it earlier, because basically as you move into the wintry times, basically after the last honey flow. So when the bees are no longer bringing in much honey, you can go ahead and move the excluder. And for those that are new to beekeeping, the reason why you're moving the excluder is so the queen can travel with the bee bulb. What happens is, if you've got a lot of honey stores up top and the bees have consumed all the honey down the bottom, all the bees will cluster together and move up through the hive to where the honey is. Now, if you've got an excluder in place, the queen can be left behind while all the bees are up top, and she may perish there, and then you start the next spring without a queen. So good idea to remove that excluder as soon as the honey flows are over, and that way you're well prepared for the winter. We don't have those issues in this area, so if you've got a good answer to that question, please chime in as well.
Thanks, Cedar. Jack's asking, how do I deal with pollen mites?
Okay, that if you've got a good answer to that question, then please chime in. I'm not too sure about that one.
Great. Okay. Yeah, I haven't heard of that one before. Cedar, now with Australia, obviously here we are going into our colder months, what do you suggest people should do over wintering, especially if they're in really colder climates?
Okay, so depending on how cold you are will depend on what you do. So where we are, you don't need to do anything. We're on the most easterly part of Australia here because it's a more subtropical region and the bees can actually forage and get good honey flows all winter. As you get further down south towards Sydney area, then you could still leave it on all year round. And then when you get further south, say down to Melbourne, or perhaps you're inland further with very cold winters, or perhaps up on the tablelands, even then you will get very cold winters, snow, and all sorts of cold times, and a really long time without the flowers. And there's two things. One is really cold, and the other one is not many flowers. So if you know you're going to get 4 or 5 months without flowers, then you'll need to prepare your hive for that. And what that means is making sure colony has enough stores to last that amount of time. And that's the basic requirement. So ask around your local beekeepers, ask how much honey do I need to leave in this region for my bees to survive the winter. And ask a few beekeepers, because you'll get different responses. Some will say you need a full box of honey, others will say you only need a small box, or your bees will be fine just in a brood box with the honey stores they have on the edge. So ask around and form your opinion, but generally more stores is better than less to survive a long time with no flowers. So what people typically do if there is no honey stores in their hive, they will feed their bees prior to the winter and let them build up stores. And they'll do that using what's called a thick syrup, which is 2 parts sugar to 1 part water, and you take that to the boil till it's all a nice liquid thick syrup, and you put that in a feeder. There's a few different types of feeders you can make, or you can purchase feeders as well, and that will allow the bees to collect that thick syrup and deposit it in the cells and give them some stores for the winter. There's also other things you can do, like dry sugar feeding. Some people will just get an empty comb and pour dry sugar into it and put it back in, and that can be a way you can feed your bees if they're starving. Removing the excluder, as we were talking about earlier, is a good idea, so the bees can actually move up through the hive freely, or the queen can, and the queen's not left behind if that bee ball needs to move up to where the honey is. And other things you might consider is reducing the size of your hive. Now, it's typical to take 1 or more of the supers off in those cold areas. Some people leave the flow frames on all winter and let the bees consume the honey that's stored in them. Some beekeepers will take the flow frames off and reduce the size of their hive for winter. So ask around, a bit of local knowledge really helps here. We've also got the beekeeper.org, where there is people and experts from around the world telling you what you should do to prepare hives for winter, and beekeepers from those snowy regions, whereas we don't have to deal with those problems day to day. So you might get better knowledge from those experts in areas where you do have really long, cold, snowy winters.
Great, thanks, Cedar. Kimberly's just tuning in, just asking, just installed 2 nukes into their flow hives. One's doing really well and probably could add the super. The other one's not doing so great. The question is, would it be better to move the brood to the smaller hive, or leave them alone and just add the super to one?
I would just add the super to the one and then have a look at the one that's not doing as well and just make sure they're happy and healthy. So if you go to the smaller one and you're doing your brood inspections, you've got your bee suit, you're having a look at the brood frames, then make sure there's a lot of brood there. If you're only seeing very patchy amounts of brood and they're not really doing so well, then also have a look around for things like chalk brood or AFB or EFB that might be affecting the colony. And then if none of those are present and you do have a nice amount of brood, then I would just wait and be patient. But if there's really just sparse, patchy amounts of brood, then you might want to consider replacing the queen in the weaker hive. Or you can just wait and see if they get back on the feet. They might replace the queen themselves. Or you might find that, you could put brood across from the other hive, but if you've got one that's ready for a super, I would just focus on that, get that going, and just monitor the other one till it gets up to speed as well. Sometimes patience is the key.
To everything. Cedar, the question, this is from someone in the Gold Coast who's obviously had all the heavy rain like we've had down here. Just wondering, is it all right to add a little, they'll put a little like 4-inch cover over the top of their brood box just to give them a little bit of weather protection. And just wondering, do you think it would affect their flight in any way, or, you know, affect the sun coming into the hive in the morning, or just give them a nice veranda?
Okay, so as I understand it, it's a roof on top of the hive, is that correct?
Yeah, I think it's on the top edge of the brood box, so...
Oh, I see, yeah. No, look, that'll be fine. There's plenty of hive designs in the world where the bees sort of fly into a bit of a box-shaped entrance, and that is for weather protection. So your bees will be fine. You can even send them down a long tube into your house and have your hive, as an observation hive inside a building. So the bees are very resilient and clever. And it might be quite a distance they have to go in order to have an extra.
Right. Kaz is asking they need to move their hive to put more sun in the
And if you're only moving a short way, then a metre or two at a time, and your bees will follow that. So each day you can shift it just a small way. If you're going a decent distance, or let's expand that out. Let's say you're going right across your yard to the other side, then it might be easy to put that on, you know, a gas trolley where you've got wheels and the hive can sit on it, just to make it easier if you're moving it every day. If you're going further, then there's another technique we can use, which is a disorientation technique, where what you do, because bees are very sensitive to their location, they're very geolocated to the spot. And if you just pick up your hive and move it, you get a lot of bees remembering where the hive was and landing there very kind of confused about where they're. So if you want to move them, let's say right across your yard in one movement, then the thing to do is get up early in the morning and close your entrance, then move it right across your yard in one go, then set up some obstacles out in front, which foliage is good if you break a whole lot of foliage off some trees or something and put that in front of the hive. Or if you don't have that, then you can get an old t-shirt or something and tape it over the entrance, just leaving little cracks for them to get out either side. What happens is the bees, with their enthusiasm, come flying out ready to go foraging for the day, and they hit this obstacle and go, oh, what's different, what's changed? And what that triggers is a reorientation pattern, and those bees will fly around and take their landmarks again. And that way you've got a lot more bees reorientating to the new spot. Doesn't work perfectly. You'll still get 5% or so moving and landing to where the old spot was. And what you can do then is put a box there, even a cardboard box or something, for those bees to land on, and then you can ferry them across to the new spot. You can do that for a few days, and that usually works quite nicely if you just want to move it in one go to the other side. So it really depends how far you're moving it. Another technique, and this is the more common one that's been done in beekeeping, is you move it more than, say, more than 6 kilometres or 4 miles, keep it there for a month, and then move it back to the new location on the other side of your yard. Remember the old spot, because aware.
I'd ask on Facebook Live, one of our flow keeper, and they just a little bit like, so it depends who I ask what answer I get.
Yes.
We're getting a bit of glitching happening too, just so you guys know.
Yeah.
As
Yeah.
well. So anyway, so the question was, Cedar, that the traditional beekeeper that she asked said, well, you have to take it off because it's a flow. Would you agree with that?
No, you don't need to. So the flow frame parts in incredibly cold environments, it won't harm it. I've had tests going in deep freezers for now 6 years. It doesn't actually harm the the parts, so it won't matter to leave the box on there over the winter if that's what you choose. So the reason why you would be taking it off would be for another reason, and that reason might be to reduce the size of the colony for the winter, and many beekeepers will do that, kind of right sizing the size of their hive for the amount of bees they've got in there, because that'll just help them keep a cozy home and survive the winter.
Great. Yeah, we're having a few little glitches. Everyone's pointing it out, but it seems to be coming and going, so hopefully we'll keep going. Cedar, question, is there a way to extract propolis with water?
Good question. If you know the answer to that, chime in the comments below.
Fantastic. Now, Michael's saying they're in the Noosa hinterland, just installed the second flow hive. The brood box is about half full. If it fills with bees before winter, should I hold off putting the super on until spring?
Possibly. So remind me of the location again?
In Noosa, so
Noosa,
just a few hours
yeah.
up the road.
Okay, if you're in Noosa, you're close to the coast, you're definitely in a subtropical region. If the bees are really full in the box, then I would just put the super on. Because you're in a warmer, temperate climate, it won't be a problem for the bees in terms of keeping their home warm. And what you might get is a nice honey flow over the winter if you've got some species that are flowering. The coastal areas on the east coast can often have quite good honey flows over the winter time. So you might find that you'll actually get some honey stored even prior to spring.
Fantastic. We've had Casey Dooley Hillbilly who sent Danica and I think you as well. To do with the hive beetle, so keep an eye out on that one, Casey, and thanks. They did a
Fantastic. Look forward to it.
Kurt's asking, been loving the bees on the south coast of New South Wales, even with this full-on weather. Wondering what your
some a lot more of a problem than others. So fingers crossed we won't have to deal with that problem. And there's a lot of great work going on with sentinel hives and things at ports to stop, I guess, the spread when and if it arrives at that port. So hopefully that kind of thing will help save us from a widespread varroa issue.
Yeah. Jessica's Cole's tuned in saying they've got both of their bees at entrance and on the ground and inside. There's no new brood or honey, but there's still plenty of bees in there. Just wondering what the problem could be, and wondering could the bees maybe be starving?
Okay, so no new brood or honey. So it's getting all a bit lightweight in there. They could be. Now, if bees are starving, it's a sad sight, but the way they usually die is with their heads down the cells. So if that's happening, you've definitely got a starving issue. But either way, if you've got no honey stores and you're worried about your colony, then feeding them will be a good idea. So although sugar's not the best thing for bees, it's a lot better than starving. So you can make a syrup. You probably go a thick syrup to give them some stores if you can, or thin or thick won't matter at this point. Or you could even go dry sugar feeding by shaking some white sugar. Make sure it's white sugar, not raw sugar. Raw sugar contains some things that aren't good for bees. So you want the more refined white sugar, and you can put some into the dry cells. That can be a way to give them some stores as well. You'll need to keep a lookout and see if you do have a queen, because perhaps you've got an issue where you've lost your queen as well. And also make sure you're staying, if you've got lots of hive beetles in your area, then make sure you're staying on top of that as well. Hive beetles will pick on a weak hive and lay their eggs, and then the whole thing turns into a slime out, is what it's called. So you might want to activate, if you've got a tray at the bottom, you could use that to catch the beetles or any other type of beetle trap.
Great. I love Facebook, how we do this Facebook Live. We've got someone tuning in from Morocco, Darjeeling. We've got people in the States. It's so awesome to be connecting with everyone out there on the Flow Hive.
Wow, Darjeeling.
I know.
I have visited.
It's a queen excluder with flow frame. I think, sometimes you say in the flow frames afterwards.
Here is you come springtime, so you're only really doing that in the extreme cold places. So lay over the winter time, they actually will bunker down to just survive the winter. So it's so cold and there's no flowers about, so the queen stops laying. So she shouldn't lay in your flow frames. And then as the spring comes and you get your first blooms and the bees starting to fly again, then what you'll need to do is shake the bees off the frames and put your off the flow frames, put your excluder back in place, and then put your flow frames back in, and that way you'll know the queen is then in the brood box down below, in the right area, and won't be laying in your flow frames. So that's basically what you would do. However, if for whatever reason the queen does lay in the flow frames, now some people, and I do this too, I'll run with no excluder year round, but some queens will lay in the flow frames and some won't. You've probably got a 50-50 chance there. So if you learn about your queen and she doesn't lay in flow frames, you can just remove the excluder altogether. Now, if for whatever reason you have managed to get into a situation where the bees or the queen has laid in the flow frames and they've been using it for brood, then it won't actually harm the flow frames. It'll make that area a bit of a brown tinge as the silk cocoons coat the parts, but it won't actually harm them, and I haven't seen it cause any issues with the movement of the parts. So it's just a case of noticing that, shaking the bees off, waiting at least 21 days for any brood to emerge, and then away you go again.
Great. Cedar, question coming in. What happens to drones in the winter time?
So, well, it's a bit of it's a bit of a sad, sorry tale there for the drones. Now, if there's not enough forage and there's a lot of drones in the hive, and the drones don't, do much around the hive at all, then the bees will sometimes rip their wings off and kick them out to die. But if there is enough stores, the bees will keep them. And drones can last about 6 months, so they could be still good to go again in spring to do their mating flights and so on. So the queen will naturally change. She will decide each time she lays. And what that means is come springtime, when that's the mating time typically, where there's a lot of new queens around for drones to mate with, to, to lay less drones throughout the rest of the season.
But, and Cedar, when will the queen...
She's the most virile in the first couple of years. So what that means for commercial beekeepers is they'll often be replacing every couple of years or so to make sure they're keeping a very strong population. Lots of eggs are being laid and there's lots of bees to do their foraging work. And what it means for us as, I guess, backyard beekeepers is we can requeen if we want to, or if we're just happy with numbers, they're healthy and they're still producing, we just let the queen live out her life, and the colony will naturally replace her if she's weakening.
But Cedar Hugh's asking, would you recommend stacking super boxes on the flow hive?
So you can add more boxes if you want to. The way I like to do beekeeping is to keep it quite simple with one brood box and one super. That just means it's easy to manage in terms of you just take one box off and then you have the brood box, and you've only got one brood box to go through if you're trying to find the queen. However, lots of people like to do things in all sorts of ways, and it is common in conventional beekeeping to do tall stacks of hives. It's often I guess, in conventional ways, people are storing honey on the hive and then harvesting all at once. So they might just notice that one hive's already filled the super, so they'll put another box on. Another hive fills the super, next week they'll put another box on, and they'll keep doing that, and then they'll process all of the honey at once, and that just makes it a bit more efficient to go through that conventional harvesting process. For flow hive beekeepers, you have a choice. You can just keep tapping off the honey and making more room for the bees to keep storing it. So if you like, you're storing honey in jars on the shelf instead of boxes on the hive. And that's the way I like to run it. But if you want to add more supers or conventional supers to your hive, then by all means, the bees won't mind. You can collect honeycomb if you want in those, or you could spin those in conventional ways, whatever you want to do.
Great. Cedar, what do I do if my brood frame wax has gone really dark? Do I need to change it or change out the frames or anything?
It's a good idea to cycle the frames out, and after they've been in there for a few seasons, they get dark and the cell walls get quite dark. Old ones out towards the edges of your brood. A few weeks for any brood to emerge from those, if they had brood in frames back in, or you can pre-prepare a wax and wire frame and swap it. So that's a great thing to do. And if you do it in the springtime, you also so you'll be doing some good spring management as well. My preferred method is running naturally drawn comb, and you can just cut the comb out right in the field and put the frame right back in, and the job's done. So that's a handy benefit of naturally drawn comb, but you can also, as said, wax and wire and pre-prepare and then swap it.
Great site here at South Australia here, and it has a hive with 2 brood boxes and 1 super. Had a great harvest of honey this year, but now the super only has a few bees in it, but both the brood boxes are full. He's just wondering, should he take off one of the brood boxes and effectively kind of doing a split and then add a super to that, or is it best to wait for spring and do this? Could he do it now, or should he wait for spring? So he's in Adelaide.
Oh, in Adelaide, I'd be waiting till spring to do your splits. They're probably going to be, you're going to get a bit of a cold winter ahead. So you want to let them build up a bit of honey for that time, and yeah, save the split till the springtime. If you think you've got a nice autumn flow though, and you want that and you want to harvest with the flow frames, then you could take one of your supers off altogether and just reduce the size of your hive to the brood box and flow super, and then you might get some stored honey in there to harvest again if you want to. Having said that, then you've got a box of full frames. You would need to leave the brood frames behind and just take the honey ones off, and the best way to store them would be in a deep freeze. So the easiest thing to do would probably be just to leave it and wait for springtime. Now you might choose to take that flow super off and reduce the size of your colony to those 2 brood boxes for the winter. We're going to have to wrap this up. We've got a low battery warning here, Trace, so we'll... Couple of last questions.
All right, okay. Cameron's asking, if you want to remain just with 1 hive, what should you do about a swarm? If you want to keep a strong hive, but you only actually want to keep 1 hive, you don't want 2 hives.
So if you don't want 2 hives, as you're probably pointing out, my favourite method is in the brood box. For your, I guess, swarm some of the frames with trigger for this. That's another trigger. And another thing you could do is add a whole nother box. And those swarming triggers. Having said that, one thing you could do if you do have the fortunate problem of your bees building up a lot and needing more space and wanting to divide and swarm, then you could offer for somebody else to come and be thankful for that, and it'll also solve your issues in terms of overcrowding come springtime, and your bees will be less likely to divide and swarm. One last question.
Right. Okay, Jennifer, lucky last question, wanting to know what to do with small hive beetles in the top part, and I guess she's meaning in the flow frames in the super.
Okay, so you will notice when you look in the windows of the flow hive, if you've got a lot of hive beetles, the bees will chase them around and corral them into the cells. And they'll hold them there, which stops them running around the hive laying eggs. Now, whether you've got a conventional hive or a flow hive, the bees will do that. And the difference with the flow hive is you can see them doing that. So it's a good thing because your bees are really corralling the beetles and doing their job, stopping them from roaming free around the hive. But if you do want to trap them, then I would just recommend using the tray down below if you've got a flow hive too, putting some oil in it, and as the beetles get chased around the hive, they'll eventually be caught down there. If you have got just ridiculous amounts of beetles and you just want to get rid of some, then you can actually take the frames out, and I imagine they're empty at this point. The frames would be empty if you're having this issue, and then you can tap them on a surface and the beetles run everywhere, and you can then squash them or whatever you like. So but generally I wouldn't worry too much about the bees corralling beetles into cells. They're doing a good job if they're doing that, and just activate your beetle trap below. Having said that, there is other types of beetle traps you can put higher up in hives as well, so you could experiment with those. Thank you very much for tuning in and all your great questions. Hopefully next week we'll get a nice sunny day to do something out in the apiary and get inside a hive and do some brood inspecting. So tune in for that. Also let us know what you'd like us to cover.